And all the way at the other end of the valley, on the far side of the hill, he could see this glowing white shape.
So, once again, you found yourself at the campsite of the Orator. Please pull up a chair. As you can see, my fire is stoked, which means tonight I have another tale to tell. But before we begin, if you do find yourself enjoying this kind of content, first-hand accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then please allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, and it allows me to continue to do what I love, which is telling terrifying tales. Second, all of my stories are first-hand real accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So, if you or anybody you know has a story that might fit well on my channel, please either reach out in the comments below or on any of my social media. We will get together, collect your story, and hopefully feature it one day here on The Orator. And now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to today's story. It is a tale that I call The White Witch. So our story starts in the early 1980s in Okinawa, Japan. Now, Okinawa is a tiny island in the southwest of mainland Japan. It's really small. And we have Charlie, who's 11 years old. He has a younger brother, Tom, who's about 8 years old, and then his mom and dad. And his dad was a military guy. And so that often meant moving around a lot. And in fact, Charlie's dad, he tried to get them to move as often as possible because one of his life philosophies was that if his kids were really well traveled and knew a ton about other cultures and stuff like that, they would just be better people. They'd be appreciative of people and cultures and history, and they would learn new languages and new techniques and all sorts of cool stuff like that. And the truth is, his philosophy sort of worked. Charlie, now as an adult, he looks back and he says, a lot of the things that made me what I am today were because of the foundation of being able to live in all these different places and experiencing these different cultures, and it's completely changed my outlook on things versus people who have very little traveled. And so this is where they're at. It's Charlie's 11. He's in Okinawa, Japan. And one of the things that his dad would do to really immerse them in the culture is he would move them off the military base, especially if they were going to be in a place for a long time. And so he'd move them off the base in Okinawa into this tiny house that was on this big cul-de-sac at the very top of a really tall hill. And they were the only Americans there in the area. Everybody else is Japanese. But Charlie and Tom had no problem with it whatsoever. First of all, they were already relatively well-traveled, so they were used to being uprooted and put into different cultures and stuff like that. But also, when you're that young, communication is just not as important. They went out and hung out with the kids. They had a ton of fun with the kids. They didn't really need to speak the same language to get a lot of what they wanted to get across. And so they had a great time. The other thing that was really cool about where they were at was their location. So they're on a cul-de-sac on one side, and if you were to look straight down this huge hill on their side of the cul-de-sac, first you'd see about 1.5 miles of really dense forest, and then at the bottom of that forest, when it's smoothed out, they lived on top of a zoo. So if you look down, you could literally see this zoo before them, and they were actually right above the monkey exhibit. But you couldn't really get any closer than being as far away as they were without actually going to the zoo. You couldn't go the back way through the forest. It was way too thick and way too dangerous. And so they had to kind of appreciate the fact that they got free view of all these zoo animals, even if it was from like 1.5 miles uphill and away. And so that was really cool. Now, if you went to the opposite side of the cul-de-sac, you would be in Mamasan's yard. Now, Mamasan, she was an older lady, and she was married, but her and her husband had never had kids. And they were sort of like the grandparents of the whole cul-de-sac. They were really sweet and nice to everybody. They constantly invited the kids over for sweets like banana chocolate cookies, green tea, rice cakes, all sorts of stuff like that. But Mama-san always made sure that if you were going to come over and enjoy the sweets and stuff like that you did something around the yard. She'd have them clean out the gutters or help with their garden, and they had one of these just totally beautiful, lush gardens. Now, on Mama-san's side of the hill, so on this side you have the zoo if you look down. If you go to Mama-san's side and look down, you would see this massive cemetery, and it's built right into the hillside. So it goes downhill, and then it flattens out a little bit into like a valley, and then there's another hill on the other side, and the entire valley is covered in these burial crypts, basically. So because Okinawa is such a small island, they didn't really bury people underground, which is typically kind of traditional. Instead, what they would do is they have these sort of above ground crypts called haka. And how they work is you have this gigantic box of cement, and then you put the body in this hole in the middle of the cement, and then you seal it with another piece of cement. And on that cement piece, there's like this slab. And when you come to mourn at these haka, you can put stuff on that slab. That's kind of what it's there for. So that people would put money, yen, or flowers, or food, or incense, all sorts of stuff to leave as kind of offerings for these spirits. And this thing was dense. Like, there were a ton of grave sites here. And they were built, like I said, right into the hills. And so the only way to get to these grave sites was to climb these really narrow stairs that were kind of built right into the hill. The problem with this is there was no repair to these things ever done. And so they were constantly crumbling and falling and breaking apart. And it was really, really dangerous to go visit these. And so, of course, the kids, being kids, were daring each other to go first through the forest and then see who could stay in the cemetery alone at night for the longest, which of course is something that kids love to do. They love to play those kind of games. Well, one day, Mamasan calls Charlie to her house. And she says, I want you, Charlie. You can't bring Tom. What I'm going to tell you, he's too little for it. I think you're old enough to handle this. And Charlie was excited right away because it's like, he's the big brother. He's going to hear information that no one else knows. And so he thinks he's like the coolest, right? So he heads over to Mama San's house in the evening time. And he goes and she invites him to the back of the house. And he goes around back. And she sits him on this beautiful wooden bench in the middle of her garden. And this is one of these just beautiful, ornately carved benches that's probably been there for like 100 years in their garden. And so he sits down and both of them just appreciate the environment. They're in this beautiful garden. The sun is setting. In fact, Mama San even remarked on how beautiful the sky looked and all that kind of stuff. She said, Charlie, I overheard you and the kids talking the other day, daring each other to go through these woods and into the cemetery, and I have to tell you why it's a really bad idea. The other kids know this, but you don't, and so I need to tell you why you can't do that, why it's such a bad idea. And he's like, oh, okay. She's like, but first, hang on, let me go get you some food. So, of course, as per usual, she comes out. She's got some sweet, sticky rice cakes and some hot green tea. She gives them to Charlie, and, they sit down, and he kind of is eating and drinking, and then she begins to tell her story. So, Mama-san, she says, one of the reasons that it's really dangerous is that the forest in between here and the cemetery is a really dangerous place. There are venomous snakes. There are these mines from World War II that have potentially not detonated, we think, out there, and so you can step on a mine. So that's dangerous. She said, but that's not the reason that I called you over here. You shouldn't go in those woods. Really, really dangerous. But I want to warn you specifically about that cemetery. And she asked him, at first, do you have any understanding of why there are so many grave sites here or why they're built into the hillside like they are or anything like that? And he's like, I have no idea. And so she goes on to explain. So all the way back in World War II, there was this huge push to get citizens to join the Japanese military and fight against the United States. And one of the ways that they encouraged people to do this was with really serious, devastating wartime propaganda. They told the Japanese citizens that the U.S. was not there to win a war. They were there to commit genocide, like a massacre. They said, you can't surrender. They're going to kill everybody. They don't care if you're a woman or a child or anything like that. They're going to kill you. And so you had better kill them first. And it worked. A lot of people came out of the fields and out of their jobs and stuff like that to join the military. But it also instilled all of this fear. And there was this one particular place that was named Suicide Cliff because of what happened. And basically, there were all of these soldiers, and they were completely outnumbered, but they didn't think they could surrender. And so instead, they literally turned and ran and jumped off the cliff and they all committed suicide there. Now, that wasn't the only time that had happened. There were a lot of other individual incidents where this stuff happened, especially during that time, because people were so terrified. And so she said, that's why there are so many graves here, because all of those people, they couldn't be buried, and so they're put into these haka, into the hillside. And Charlie was really struck by this, and he was really upset by it. He starts crying. He's like, I had no idea, and obviously I don't want to disturb these grave sites, especially after everything these people have been through. And, Mamasan, she puts her hand on his hand, and she comforts him, and she says, it's okay. That was a thing that happened in the past, but we should never forget the past so that we don't repeat the mistakes that we made. It's good to take this knowledge and move forward. And so she helps him calm down and everything like that. And she said, but that's not what this story is about. I'm not here to tell you about a bunch of soldiers who committed suicide and are buried here. I'm here to tell you about the White Witch. And so Charlie, he kind of like perks up, and he's very confused. He says, all right. She said, part of this is sort of like a legend, but there's a lot of evidence pointing to it having happened. One day, there was a lady, and she was so scared that her and her kids were going to get killed by the U.S. military that she took her 2 children, and they all went off that suicide cliff. And, obviously they fall into the water below, and that's pretty much the end of things, except a couple months go by, and the lady wakes up in the hospital. She had fallen and somehow had survived the fall. And now she was, months later woke up from this coma, and she's screaming for her children, and it's dawning on her what had happened. Her children passed away. She survived, and now she has to live with the fact that she didn't have to do this because they would not have gotten killed, but also that she's the one that did this to her children, and she's just grief-stricken. And so she right away goes to this valley, and she's searching for her children's graves, but so many people had died in such a short period of time that most of these graves were completely unmarked. You have no idea who's in them. And so most people just come and they mourn in general, knowing that their loved ones are somewhere in that area. But she was so grief-stricken, she just wanted to find her kids. And so she would wander the cemetery night and day trying to find her kids, even though it was just impossible. And her grief was so bad, her guilt was so bad, that she just went and did it again. She jumped off the cliff, and this time it worked. She passed away, and her whole goal was just wanting to see her kids. Unfortunately, when you commit suicide, it said that your soul is damned to purgatory instead of being able to pass on to the afterlife. And so, the story goes that because she killed herself, her soul couldn't move on, and so she is stuck not being with her children even now. And so she tells Charlie this story, and he's like kind of freaked out, but also at the same time kind of like, oh, that's a good one. I like ghost stories, And then Mama-san really quietly, she says, all right, I invited you over at this time specifically because now it's nighttime. And they look up, and it's completely black now. She's told her story long enough that where the beautiful evening sky is completely changed, and now it's pitch black, and there's stars and the moon overhead, and so they can kind of see, but it's very clearly dark out now. And so she says, all right, I need you to turn around and look out into the cemetery. And Charlie, at this point, gets scared because he thought this was just like a story to have them keep away, but this is clearly more than that. And so even though he was pretty terrified at this point, Charlie slowly turns and looks out into this valley, this giant cemetery. And all the way at the other end of the valley, on the far side of the hill, he could see this glowing white shape. And the way he described it is, it looked like a ghost. It was like a woman's shape, but it was glowing brighter than that made any sense. It wasn't a lantern or anything. It was the person itself was glowing. And she was moving this really unnaturally smooth way. And she would literally just go from gravesite to gravesite and stop for a minute and then move on and stop for a minute and then move on and stop for a minute. And as she's sort of getting closer, she's going down the side of the valley, and after a while making her way up the other side, Charlie can hear her crying. Even though they're like 1.5 miles, 2 miles away uphill through this dense forest, he's looking out and he sees her, and he can hear her crying. And Mama-san says, that lady, she's just looking for her kids, and she's scared and all that. But the locals have come to call her the White Witch because they don't know her backstory and what happened. And she's really offended by this. And so anybody who goes into the cemetery at night, she attacks them thinking that they're one of these people calling her the White Witch. So you have to stay away and just leave that cemetery alone at night. And so as she's telling him this, he's hearing her getting closer and closer. And he can hear her cries, and they're not just distant, off, way away, and all that. He can hear her getting louder, and they're going from this sort of like ethereal, way far away echo to this really guttural crying and screaming and pleading. And he just loses it. He can't handle it anymore. So he gets up and he goes to run away, and Mamasan grabs his hand and sits him back down. She puts her hand on his hand. She says, listen, you're fine. She doesn't come up here, and you're safe. I won't let anything happen to you. She said, but I just wanted you to know this is why you can't go down there, because there's something malevolent down there, and you cannot be near it when it's there. She said, but don't worry. I come out here most nights, and I watch for her, and every night I pray for her, and I hope that one day she does find her children. And so Charlie, he hears this, and he is totally terrified. So he goes back home, and he tells Tom just enough so that Tom decides not to also go. He says, listen, I can't tell you all the details. I don't want to scare you, but we cannot go down there. And that was it for them. After that, they literally did not. They didn't play around in the forest anymore. They didn't go anywhere near that cemetery, even during the day. And that was pretty much the end for Charlie. He just said, you know what? I'm happy with the zoo side of things. I don't need to go over to this side. I don't need to experience that again. And so, they were there for a couple more years. And then at some point, they were getting ready to leave Japan. And Charlie asked his dad if they could visit this place, Suicide Cliff, which is now renamed Peace Prayer Park. And they did. His dad would take him there, and he literally would just go out and stand there in this place where all of these people thought they had no choice but to end their lives. And he just let it wash over him, and he cried, and he prayed for these people. And he just appreciated knowing the culture and the history of this great place. But he said, even now as an adult, even though he still likes to go and visit some of these old places, one place he'll never go and visit again is that cemetery, because he's afraid of this wailing woman, this White Witch. And so that's going to do it for today's story. If you did enjoy this content, firsthand accounts of supernatural and paranormal activity, then please allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell. That way you do get notified every time I upload new content, and it allows me to continue to do what I love, which is telling terrifying tales. And of course, all of my stories are firsthand true accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So if you or anybody you know has a story like this that might fit well on my channel, please either reach out in the comments below or on any of my social media, and we'll find time to get together, collect your story, and hopefully retell it here one day on the Orator. So until next time, where you will pull up your chair, the fire will be stoked, and I will have another tale to tell.